Some stories never leave you, and Katoucha Niane's is one of them. She ruled runways, inspired Yves Saint Laurent, and then disappeared under chilling circumstances. No note, no witnesses, only silence. Stick around, because her mystery still raises unsettling questions. Before Paris, before the lights and catwalks, there was Guinea. Not the capital, not even a city. A village on the riverbanks where tradition wasn't questioned, it was lived. And that's where Katoucha Niane began her story. She was born in 1960, part of the Pule people, also known as the Fulani, one of the largest nomadic ethnic groups across West Africa. Now, nomadic sounds romantic, right? Sand dunes, sun-washed cattle, open skies. But for the girls born into those families, life came with rules, expectations, and for too many, pain. Especially one practice that casts a long, violent shadow, female genital mutilation, also known as FGM. We'll get to that. But hold that thought. Katoucha's father wasn't just anyone. Djibril Tamsir Niane was a historian, a playwright, and one of the great intellectual minds of post-colonial Africa. He wrote Sundiata, the Epic of Mali, and passed down stories like most passed down heirlooms. Books lined the walls of their homes, when they had walls. The family moved a lot, Guinea to Mali, then to Senegal, then eventually to France. Wherever they went, her father was the kind of man who spoke truth, even when it shook people. That kind of energy leaves a mark. And Katoucha? She was the wild one, sharp-tongued, free-spirited, a little unpredictable. She had this presence that made people turn their heads before she even said a word. Her childhood wasn't all textbooks and family dinners. It was fractured, sometimes rough. She later spoke about being rebellious, about running away from home. You don't end up in fashion from a Fulani village by coloring inside the lines. But somehow, between Dakar and Paris, between her father's intellect and her own hunger for something different, Katoucha found her way in. Not into fashion, not yet, but into independence. She got married young, had kids, got divorced, tried to figure herself out in a world that didn't exactly hand out second chances, especially to single Black mothers, especially in France. Still, there was something about her. People noticed, and in a world that chews up and spits out even the most polished, Katoucha wasn't polished. She was electric. That look? Regal and sharp at the same time. Long limbs, cheekbones that could cut glass, eyes that didn't just look at you, they sized you up. And then, just like that, the fashion world came calling. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Modeling wasn't the goal. It wasn't even on the radar. She wasn't chasing fame. She was trying to survive, make rent, feed her kids. And if that meant walking runways in Milan instead of waiting tables in Montmartre, well, guess which one pays more? By the early 80s, Katoucha wasn't just doing well. She was standing next to legends. Photographers were obsessed, designers too. And then came the call from Yves Saint Laurent. That wasn't just a gig, that was history. She became his muse, not the background kind, the front row of the sketchbook kind. When he was designing African-inspired pieces, it wasn't just about patterns or silhouettes. It was about her bearing, her culture, her confidence. That whole Pearl Princess nickname, that wasn't PR. That was the real deal. And for a while, it looked like she'd made it. Really made it. Magazine covers, exclusive shows, traveling the world. The kind of fame that makes people forget where you came from. But she didn't forget. Not the village, not the scars, not what happened to her when she was 9. And that's where this story turns. Yves Saint Laurent didn't just hire Katoucha. He saw her. Not as a token, not as a trend, but as an embodiment of something elegant, commanding, untamed. She wasn't walking the runway like everyone else. She moved like she already owned it, and she kind of did. In the 80s, Saint Laurent was the god of Paris fashion. You landed on his runway. You mattered. But Katoucha wasn't just another pretty name on the casting sheet. She was his muse, the one he turned to when he wanted to channel something powerful, something that didn't fit neatly into the lines of European haute couture. She was Africa to him, but not the safari daydream kind. She carried the weight, the grace, the boldness. His collections around that time, they mirrored her silhouette. His sketches had her angles. When you saw her in those clothes, it wasn't just fabric anymore. It was art. She made his designs make sense. But here's the twist no one talks about. Even at the center of that world, Katoucha never really fit in. She was there, yes, but always a little separate, always a little other, because the fashion industry, even now and especially then, didn't know what to do with Black beauty unless it was exoticized. Designers wanted her image, her essence, but not always her voice. Photographers chased her for the shot, but behind the camera, that same energy didn't follow her home. She knew it, felt it, lived it, and still, she pushed. Hard. She turned that runway presence into a signature. She wasn't the shy model waiting to be discovered. She demanded space, sometimes too much, according to those who worked with her. She could be difficult, they'd say. But think about that. How often is that just code for unapologetic? And she had reason. Because while the world called her a princess inside, she was still fighting a nightmare that no photo shoot could edit out. At 9 years old, Katoucha had undergone FGM, a ritual forced on millions of girls in West Africa. Most never talk about it. Most don't survive it without some part of themselves going numb. But Katoucha? She carried that pain right under the surface, smiling, posing, knowing. Eventually, she started talking. Quietly at first. Interviews, private conversations, then more openly. And in a space like fashion, where vulnerability isn't just rare, it's inconvenient. That made her stand out all over again. But this time, not as a muse, as a problem. An activist. A woman refusing to stay inside the frame. By the late 80s and early 90s, the energy around her had shifted. She still modeled, still did shows, covers, shoots. But there was tension. She wasn't playing the role anymore. She wasn't softening her voice. She started naming things, practices, countries, people. And for an industry that thrives on fantasy, Katoucha was getting too real. And that's where things got messy. Because while she was finding her voice, the industry was slowly turning the volume down. She aged out of high fashion faster than her white peers. Bookings slowed, invitations dried up. She moved to the outskirts of the scene, not literally, but emotionally. Fashion is brutal like that. 1 year you're the face of a movement, the next you're just gone. But she wasn't done. Instead of shrinking, she stepped into her second act. She founded her own organization, KPLCE, Katoucha pour la lutte contre l'excision, aimed at educating and ending FGM. She wrote a memoir, Dans ma chair, In My Flesh, where she laid it all bare. The trauma, the silence, the rage. It wasn't polished. It wasn't sanitized. It was hers. Raw and uncomfortable. And not everyone liked that. Some critics accused her of exploiting her past. Others said she was exaggerating. But the thing is, no one could unread that book. No one could unhear her voice once she'd said those words out loud. She made a whole generation confront something they'd never even heard of before. She wasn't chasing the camera anymore. She was aiming it. By the early 2000s, Katoucha was no longer a regular name in fashion magazines. Her modeling work had slowed. She wasn't doing campaigns or walking major runways anymore. The industry had moved on. She was in her 40s, and in fashion, that often means being ignored. But she hadn't disappeared. She stayed in Paris. She lived on a houseboat docked along the Seine. Her focus had shifted entirely to activism. The fight against FGM had become her main work. She gave interviews, appeared at conferences, and spoke directly to women affected by the practice. Some of her appearances were on French television. Others were at events across Europe and West Africa. In 2007, she published Don Ma Chère. The book was a mix of autobiography and advocacy. She described her experience undergoing FGM as a child. She explained how it affected her physically and mentally. She also talked about her modeling career, her family, and her personal struggles. The book didn't receive widespread attention outside of France, but in activist spaces, it made an impact. Her organization, KPLCE, kept working on the ground. They held workshops. They met with women and families in communities where FGM was still practiced. Katoucha didn't approach the issue from a distance. She used her own life as the example. That gave her message a certain weight. She had been through it. She had lived with the consequences. Despite the seriousness of her work, Katoucha didn't isolate herself. Friends said she was social. She liked to host people. She still had ties to the fashion world. She occasionally attended events. But there was also instability. Some reports suggest she struggled with substance use. Others mention financial problems. These were never confirmed publicly, but they became part of how people explained what happened next. On February 1, 2008, Katoucha attended a party in Paris. She left late at night and returned to her houseboat. That was the last confirmed time anyone saw her. The next morning, she wasn't there. Her purse was found on the boat, but she was gone. For 3 weeks, her disappearance was a mystery. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, just an empty space where someone should have been. On February 28, 2008, police recovered her body from the Seine. She was found near the Pont du Garigliano. The official conclusion was accidental drowning. The report said she had likely fallen while returning to the boat and was unable to climb back out. They found no signs of foul play, but a lot of people didn't believe that story. Friends and family said she was familiar with the river. She had lived on that boat for years. They questioned how she could fall in and not call for help. Some pointed to her activism and suggested there may have been people who wanted her silenced. Others looked at her past, her financial situation, or personal habits. The speculation spread quickly, but none of it was confirmed. Her death remains surrounded by doubt. No one has presented hard evidence of anything beyond the police report. But even now, years later, the questions haven't gone away. People close to Katoucha remember her as intense. She cared deeply about what she was doing. She wasn't afraid to speak directly. That sometimes made her difficult to work with, but it also made her voice hard to ignore. After her death, tributes came in from the fashion world and from human rights groups. Many described her as one of the first major African models to achieve international recognition. Others focused on her role in raising awareness about FGM. Some mentioned both. Few could agree on exactly how to describe her. She wasn't easily defined, and even in death, the story was incomplete. Katoucha's story didn't end when her body was pulled from the Seine. The conversation about her, and around her, kept moving, but not in headlines or memorials, mostly in quiet questions, mostly in the way people still say her name with uncertainty. The fashion industry acknowledged her in passing. A few obituaries ran in European fashion publications. They called her a trailblazer, a muse. Some mentioned her activism. Most focused on the era when she worked with Yves Saint Laurent. None of the tributes stayed in the public eye for long. Within a few weeks, the coverage faded. But in activist circles, her name still carries weight. People who work in the fight against FGM often point to her as one of the first high-profile women to speak openly about it. She didn't use careful language. She didn't filter her story. She described the pain directly. She named names. She described exactly what was taken from her. That level of honesty was rare, especially from someone who had spent years in an industry built on appearance. In West Africa, her work helped start conversations in places where silence had been the norm. In France, her organization created space for African women to speak about violence in a country that often ignored their stories. She didn't live long enough to see long-term policy changes, but she laid groundwork. Others picked it up after her. Her book, Don Ma Cher, still circulates in activist and academic spaces. It's been cited in research about trauma and in advocacy work around reproductive rights. It hasn't been widely translated. It didn't become a bestseller. But it sits on shelves where people study silence and how it breaks. For some, that's the legacy. A woman who put her pain into words and used them to push against a system. But others remember something else. The mystery, the uncertainty, the questions that were never fully answered. There's no real public investigation into Katoucha's death beyond the police report. There's no documentary, no major profile. For someone who stood next to one of the most powerful names in fashion, her death was treated as a brief news item. That still sits wrong with a lot of people. Some believe that's because of who she was. A Black woman with a complicated story, speaking on subjects most media avoids. Others believe her shift from fashion to activism made her easier to ignore. She didn't belong to the industry anymore. She had moved out of the spotlight. And when that happens, attention fades. But silence doesn't erase impact. Today, conversations about FGM happen on bigger stages. There are laws, campaigns, school programs, NGO-funded projects. Much of that work has been shaped by survivors, women who chose to speak even when it was dangerous or unpopular. Katoucha did that before it was considered part of the conversation. She didn't ease people into the issue. She forced it to the surface. There are no statues, no fund in her name, no international awards. But for those who followed her work, she's remembered. Not for her runway walk, not for her photo shoots, but for what she said, and for how she said it. She didn't speak like someone looking for approval. She spoke like someone who had already lost too much to care about being liked. Her story doesn't have a clean ending. The details are still unclear. There are no final answers. But the silence that followed her death still raises questions. Not just about how she died, but about how easy it was to let the world move on. Katoucha's story doesn't wrap itself neatly. It's not the kind of story that becomes a biopic or a tribute spread. But it matters, because it says something about what the world pays attention to and what it chooses to forget. She reached the height of an industry that often makes people disposable. She became visible in rooms where people like her were usually invisible. She spoke up in a space that values silence. And when the spotlight faded, she still kept going. She wasn't perfect. She didn't try to be. Her life had chapters people didn't understand. There were decisions, contradictions, and consequences. But through all of it, she kept returning to one thing, telling the truth about what happened to her and making sure it didn't keep happening to others. That's what she left behind, a record of her voice, a body of work that still circulates quietly, a name that still sparks questions, even if the answers never fully came. So maybe the legacy isn't just what she did. Maybe it's also what she made impossible to ignore. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking with the story. If Katoucha's life left you with questions, or even just a feeling you can't quite shake, let us know what stood out to you in the comments. We're building a space here for stories that don't always get told. So if that's something you want more of, hit subscribe. And if you think someone else should hear this, send it their way. See you in the next one.